6 hours without power a day. That is what stages 3 and 4 power cuts means for many of us. Eskom confirming this afternoon that the plan will continue until Saturday. That's stage 3 up until 4 p.m, stage 4 from 4 to midnight. Even the president was plunged into darkness halfway through his speech at the local government conference today. An embarrassing reminder of the impact of power cuts for him. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan, of course, has been reviewing Eskom's board and is now planning a shake-up. The board has been missing half its members for years now. And I'm joined by Connie Mulder, head of the Solidarity Research Institute. Solidarity, of course, is a union, has a number of members employed at Eskom. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do you agree the board needs urgent attention and that urgent attention is going to be key in helping us deal with load shedding?
Well, Sally, we agree that the board definitely needs urgent attention. It's a scandal that we've had this crisis for so many years, and we have not tried to fill the vacancies on that board and get the requisite skills into the Eskom board to manage load shedding. So on the one hand, it's most definitely a priority to get Eskom stabilized, and getting the right people into the board is correct. At the moment, I think we've got one person on the board with a history in sort of physicists with engineering, and then we've got one energy expert. That is not enough for the crisis we're in. This should be a crisis board. But where we differ is we don't think the board is going to be critical to ending load shedding ultimately. I don't think Eskom's going to be able to do that. We will need to move to private generation, and that means that whilst Minister Gordhan is shaking up the board, it would be a good time for President Ramaphosa to also shake up his cabinet and get rid of a bit of the deadwood that has caused this crisis. We've got a minister at the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy who's saying it's not his job when it's explicitly his job, and we need to start seeing real accountability, and that's at that side, and we need to see tangible results of the political will that will be needed to get out of this crisis.
But what we're told, and we know that there's now a plan to try and buy private power from some of the big companies like your Sappies and your Sasols that generate power. But even that, apparently, there haven't been enough companies forthcoming. That's probably the quickest route to get some extra power. But new generating projects, we're told, are going to take a couple of years at least.
Well, some of them and others not, but we should be facilitating the most expedient process that we can, which from our perspective would be there should be massive incentives for people to put rooftop solar on top of shopping malls, on top of any of shopping malls, schools, universities, and then facilitate and incentivize this with a generous feed-in tariff scheme that says just get electrons onto the grid. Now, this can be done, we know this from international examples, this can be done within a year if we really start properly incentivizing it. The President announced it in his speech, but what we're not seeing is we're not seeing sufficient action and sufficient speed of action from the department, from NERSA, and from municipalities who should be publishing, this is what wheeling will cost you, this is what we're going to pay you if you start adding electricity to the grid. And it's really a dark time when you've got the President who seems to understand the depth of the crisis, but no one else in government who's moving at the speed that is necessary for South Africa to get out of this. And every single hour we're in load shedding, according to our research, it's about 125 jobs that get lost per hour per stage. So you can count the past couple of weeks, several families, more than a couple of thousand families have lost their breadwinners due to this. The economic damage is incalculable. We have to move to privatize generation. Eskom knows that this is the future. We need to stabilize Eskom. That's why the board's important. But the future of energy in South Africa will be large-scale, small-scale generation, with municipalities more and more taking responsibility for the energy demands, and hopefully government either getting on board or getting out of the way, just making it possible for the private sector and the community sector to actually solve this problem. We cannot continue like we're doing at the moment.
One of the arguments we hear from people, some of the detractors say, we really shouldn't be putting so much money and effort into alternative power, because alternative power is not baseload power. Your baseload power is your solid bed of power that is always there, that can be constantly supplied. So your coal-generated power or your gas-generated power, I would imagine. What do you say to people who feel that alternative energy is not the way to go?
Well, I would argue they're correct that we cannot do everything. You will always need baseload. But at the moment, we do not have enough. We do not have enough power at any point of the day. That's why we're in load shedding 24 hours. We just need electrons on this grid. If we're doing, let's say, we just get alternative power during business hours, that will already make a massive difference to the economic damage. Baseload-wise, I think we're under no illusions that Eskom will be part of whatever energy future we're talking about. And if we can relieve the pressure on Eskom during peak hours through alternative energy sources, through embedded generation, through small-scale generation, through wholesale trading of power, if we can get that going, then I think Eskom's coal fleet would have enough breathing room to still be able to supply baseload whilst we get larger commercial projects that can facilitate that role online. At the moment, however, it's academic to talk about baseload versus peak. We don't have power at any time of the day. And that means we just need electrons in this grid. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter when.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're sitting at the moment this evening 20,000 megawatts down, which is almost half of the current capacity of our grid. We saw today the president addressing that Salga conference, and then halfway through the lights went out. He sort of chuckled nervously and tried to sort of talk his way through it. He did address the load shedding issue, but just the visuals and the optics of that is such a clear indication of the problem that we're having. The president is now saying, you know, load shedding is here for a long time, but we're going to try and reduce the severity and intensity of it. One of the things that Solidarity has championed is trying to bring skills back into this country. Many skilled engineers who've left South Africa. I know that you gave a list to, I think, the president, and we know that there's been some movement on that. But just update us, how is it going with getting skills back to this country, either to sit on the board or to actually help with the nuts and bolts of running the power stations?
Yes, so we were actually quite taken aback by the amount of positive feedback we got when we asked members or ex-Eskom employees who are now facilitating power projects for other countries and helping them solve their energy crisis, with massive amounts of people saying, we'll gladly come back and we'll solve this. There's a sense of pride in Eskom, and then a sense of wounded pride, if you'd call it. They're bitterly disappointed in what Eskom has become. So we supplied a list of skilled engineers, specifically with generation skilled focus, to Minister Gordon and to Eskom's management. And from what we can tell, 18 have already been appointed on fixed-term contracts. So these are senior positions. It's guys who need to sort of crack the whip at a power station and get it running at any sort of measure of efficiency again. We've heard from several they're still being engaged or to get fixed-term contracts. Many of these are retired employees. Unfortunately, as with everything in South Africa, the list has now run into political storms, with people saying, ANC saying the list isn't diverse enough. Now, we're of the opinion, honestly, we didn't even ask what race the people on the list are. We simply asked what skills you have. And that is the mindset that we should be tackling this problem with. We're in a crisis. This is the 11th hour. We should be all hands on deck, and we should not be caring how we get these skills or what these skills look like. We should just be making sure that people who can actually get the power stations running a bit better are on inside Eskom, are helping as best they can. Right. From our perspective, however, we're aware this is a temporary measure. Eskom needs to stabilize to help in the energy landscape, but we need to move quicker and much more deliberately towards private generation and privatized generation. And from that point, there's still a lot of political points or political decisions that need to be made, and that the president can make and crack the whip from the top to ensure that we make it as easy as possible for small-scale generators to generate power and to sell it to consumers who desperately want it.
Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. Connie Mulder, head of the Solidarity Research Institute.